I wonder what would have happened if I followed my dad. Read by Psycho. This particular incident happened almost a decade ago, when I was maybe 10. I think I should stress before this that my parents aren't really pranksters, even in regular social situations where everybody's joking around and messing with each other. They usually get straight to the point. I have no reason at all to believe that they were lying. It was the camping trip my dad had been looking forward to every day since the snow melted into springtime. He'd request a week off in late June so that we could all go up to his favorite chunk of forest, the state park, about an hour's drive away from where we live, and to do this family thing. Uh, we get to set up on a campground, us two kids in one tent, and my parents in another tent. The first day goes great. There's a lot of splashing around in the river and hiking. I've been kind of a chubby kid my whole life, so that part was less great. Doing fun family stuff. mm, My brother and I rarely get along, so this was one of those rare moments that we enjoyed each other's company. Anyway, the sun starts to set, casting everything in gold, and then night finds the four of us sitting around in the campfire making s'mores. I remember getting really spooked by all the noises in the distance, and my parents were constantly telling me to calm down. They claimed uh, that it was a few other campers or a small furry animal such as raccoons, squirrels, or whatever running about in there. This eased it, that eased my nerves for a moment, or so I could have sworn I heard a particular sound nearby, though. I knew that the sound from all the games of hide and seek I'd play so often as a kid. It was the sound of someone trying to hold their breath, but they were too excited to fall completely silent. But only for a moment, and then it was gone. The real event happened the next night. All four of us were in our tents. My brother fast asleep in the sleeping bag right next to me. I have a lot of body warmth, so I had unzipped my bag and was just laying, staring into the darkness. I was trying to fall asleep to the soft lullaby of Mother Nature and whatnot, but it wasn't really coming to me. I reached over and, as delicately as possible, slipped my brother's old flip phone out of his pillowcase, where I knew he liked to keep it safe. I don't remember the exact time, but it was very early in the morning. Back when I was that age, I really stayed up after 10 p.m. Nearby, I heard a zipping sound. It was probably coming from my parents' tent, I figured. Thinking that somehow my dad knew I was awake, I quickly slipped the phone back into the pillowcase and fell back into sleep position. I muffled footsteps, the crunching of gravel, the snapping of twigs walked closer toward our tent, then coming to a stop right outside the tent flap. Dad, I asked, for a moment, whispering so as not too loud to wake my brother. Hey, I'm going to the bathrooms. Do you need to go too? The person outside the tent asked. I'm remembering that the bathrooms at that big building in the middle of the campgrounds that held the showers and toilet stalls were the direction of my dad was walking. I realized that I have to pee. Yeah, give me a second, I replied quietly. So I quietly got up, slipped gingerly over my brother, slipped on my flip flops, and exited the tent. Sure enough, some ways down the gravel pathway that led to the bright light of the bathrooms was the big, bulky silhouette of my father. He was too far and the light too glaring to see him too clearly. I walked after, shivering slightly in the wind. I got to the bathrooms. My dad probably already in one of the stalls since I couldn't find him anywhere in there. I went into a stall. I did my business as he exited his stall without flushing. That gave me the first indication there. And he left the building again without washing his hands. I finished up and followed after him. Dad, wait, I called, picking up speed to catch up. The bulky silhouette waved his hand over to me and headed into a different angle of the trees that we had come. This confused me and I stopped. Hey, come on. This is a shortcut, my dad said. I realized I'd never actually seen his face the entire night, so I got a little nervous. That's a stupid shortcut. I'm just going this way, I said, and headed toward the actual direction of the campsite. The man got impatient. Get over here right now. We're going this way, you little piece of crap. My dad had never sworn to me before that, so that's when the alarm bells really started ringing. I turned and ran as fast as I could, finding our camping spot and particularly diving into my parents' tent. To surprise, I found my parents playing cards under the light of the tiny electronic lamp. I asked my dad if he's gone to the bathrooms at all tonight, which he replied no. My parents had woken up a few minutes ago by what they thought was a raccoon snooping around where a trash bag was. That's when they decided they couldn't really sleep, so they should play cards. I told them about what happened, and my parents got out of the tent and searched the area, but didn't find anyone. To this day, I can't decide if there was an actual man trying to lure me into forest or if I just had a bad dream or something. Horrific Night Camping, read by Psycho. Let me start by saying the first post on the sub, so if I dickered up anything, please tell me and I'll fix it. Also, for reference, I was a 19-year-old female at the time. Still female, of course, just a little older. I love camping. Any time my friends and I come home from college, we would load up our cooler with beer, grab some gear, and go screw around outside. Fortunately, when I was actually at school, none of my sorority sisters or other friends ever wanted me to go with me, so I would often suffer withdrawals from camping. One day, the weather was way too nice to waste, so I grabbed some of my gear, hopped in a car that I borrowed from a buddy, and drove to a spot that was secluded yet within a safe distance to civilization, that I could run and get help. Camping also cheers me out sometimes, but that creepy feeling is also somewhat of a plus for me. It's the same reason that people read these stories. It's fun to be scared. So I make a little camp and get a fire going. I hadn't brought all that much to eat, but I was enjoying myself. Reading and looking around the area and that sort of thing. I got the feeling I was being watched and I stopped dead in my tracks. I hear a twig crunch over to my right. Then I see a doe bolt from 100 feet or so in front of me. I laughed at myself, then went back to the camp with the armful of wood I had gathered. I kept freaking myself out, hearing sounds just outside of the ring of light casting by the fire. I always get inside my head, so I shrugged it off and kept whittling at a stick I had been messing with. Uh, Around 1, I decided to go to my tent and snuff out the lantern. I had been slamming beers in the most unladylike fashion and smoking cheap cigars, so I passed out relevantly quickly. About 2 o'clock, I start hearing footsteps. They sound pretty light and sort of timid. I I think to myself that's a deer or another animal, more likely a raccoon, because I had probably left some food uh, by the tent. I'm still on guard though. At about 30 minutes of sleeping with one eye open, I hear a rubbing noise, and the tent fabric is being pushed in a bit. I don't know how I did poo with my sleeping bag, but I just sat there paralyzed with my K-bar in my hand, and I just apparently wanted to thrust my knife through the tent fabric, but I was still holding out hope that it was some of my buddies from a frat joking with me, and and then as suddenly as it had begun, it all stopped. I was starting to feel slightly more secure because daylight would be coming in about 2 or 3 hours. But I sure as crap wasn't going to sleep. All of a sudden, at about 4 o'clock, I realized I should put my boots on so if anything happened, I would be ready. After having stayed up and keeping alert a little while longer, my friend's car alarm goes blaring. I freaked the F out and ran out of the tent. I got about 2 steps before something grabs me around the mouth. I open my mouth and scream, but instead, the person's pinky finger slips between my teeth, and I've heard that people can perform superhuman feats when they have huge rushes. In my case, I just clamped down and uh, on his finger. His finger popped off. He screamed, pulled his hand away with a missing uh, digit falling to the ground. He took off running down the hill I was camping on. I took off right quick in the opposite direction. I must have looked ridiculous to the people whose house I ran to. A little girl with in a wife beater, boxers, and steel toe boots. I also had some blood that oozed out of my lip, not from the finger, but because I had also managed to take a pretty good chunk out of my lip as well. I told them what happened. They called the police, got me some real clothing, and the man at the house made me a whiskey and a Coke. When the cops got there, they checked it out. The cops went to check it out, and when they came back, it was light out. They brought me back so I could get my friend's car. What I saw made me more scared. Right next to the 20 the tent was a red gas can. He could have just lit me on fire earlier. The finger was also gone, suggesting he had come back. The kicker is they never get caught. They never caught the guy. So when somewhere out there, the man sitting down to dinner, maybe alone, maybe with a wife or a couple of kids, he's missing his right pinky right now. Disturbing Camping Encounter, read by Psycho. Background: I work summers as a camp counselor in the northern parts of Ontario, Canada. On the date this particular incident occurred, I was camping with a group of 10-year-olds on the same lake the summer camp was based on. So, like a routine camping trip, we canoe out to the site and set up our tents. Me and my co-counselor, Mike, take turns supervising the kids while they swim, build forts, and play games, etc. We cook some food over the fire, sit around, and tell stories. Cook s'mores, the typical Canadian camping experience. Around 9:30ish, I tell the kids it's time for bed, and they head into their tents, which were positioned into a small walk away from the shoreline, but still in line of sight from where we had the fire pit. So the kids had gone to bed, and me and Mike are shooting the crap by the water, smoking a cigarette. I basically hanging out before we decided to head into our tent to call it a night. What happened next still troubles me to this day and remains my go-to scary campfire story. We were both gazing into the pitch black night water, when we saw a small light approaching us slowly and slightly above the water level. We speculated it could be what it could possibly be for a few minutes before it came close enough for us to see that it was mounted on the front of a kayak, and that someone's approaching our campsite. Now, it's a little important to note that the camp counselor, part of our training, goes how to deal with stranger encounters in the environment, where we were responsible for a group of children in public property. I was prepared to give the mystery paddler a thickable speech about how we are camping with a group of recognized organization, and we would respectfully ask that they find other campsites. However, this person appearance shook me to the bone as the light drew near. The paddling his kayak was a woman who looked to be in her mid-60s. She had incredibly long, wispy gray hair that was thrilling in the water. Her skin looked like old leather, and her dead-looking eyes were through the spot under her wrinkles. She looked directly at me, and when she spoke, I realized she was missing most of her teeth. Are all of your children safe in bed? She asked me, pointing in the direction of the tents. Not really knowing how to respond, and quite frankly, crapping myself, I respond by telling her that they were fine and that she should leave. That's good, expected for this time, she said, with a smile that turned her kayak and paddled off into the night. At this point of time, myself and Mike were legitimately very creeped out. Not only because of the appearance of this mystery woman who resumed a freaky corpse, uh, but also her inquiry about the whereabouts and safety of the kids. And we had brought on this trip not knowing what else to do. We grabbed our hunting knives and sat by the fire and checking on the kids. After half an hour later is where crap started to get really creepy. Across the lake, a female counselor was leading another trip for kids in the same age group. She sent me a text which read something along the lines, "Hey, Cian, stop screwing with us. This isn't funny. My kids are really creeped out." I instantly called her and let her know that I had just seen someone near my campsite that seemed eerie and that I was not trying to play a joke. Apparently, one of their kids had opened their tent door to take a piss and seen a woman with a long hair standing with her arms open towards them near the shoreline. Being watched while camping in the deep woods. Read by Psycho. I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in northeast Georgia. It's a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of national forest, some great state parks, and a ton of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is also relatively poor, while there are some out-of-town residents from Atlanta and other places. Are a lot of people where I live are really poor. I do freelancely work as a technical writer, so I can do most of my work online. If I didn't have that going for me, I'd have to move somewhere else. It's just one of those small towns that will rob you of your ability to accomplish anything in life. If you stay there too long without anything else going for you, at least, including a handful of other doctors, the lawyers, and Georgia Power Company employees, the employment in this area is a Walmart, fast food, and a couple of grocery stores. To the east of my town, there's a massive national forest. It's loaded with great camping sites and lots of unused hiking trails. I really enjoy hiking on them with my dog, but it can be a bit of an unnerving experience. Sometimes it's about 10-mile drive from town, and there's no cell phone service or homes for miles. In the past, there have been lots of vehicle breakdowns at the trailheads. The gravel parking lots at some of them glitter with bits of broken glass from what I'm guessing were car windows. Sometimes there are really shifty people hanging around these trailheads or just driving around on the forest service roads. These are really rough roads, and you'll see the beat up $500 cars just barreling along the roads meant for 4x4. Some of the people you see in the cars look like the guy that got crushed by an ATM in Breaking Bad. All that being said, it's still a great place to camp. However, you just have to be careful. A few years ago, two of my friends and I decided to go play paintball in the national forest. Probably not illegal, I know. We decided to turn the paintball expedition to a camping trip so we could play the next morning too. After a pretty eventful day of shooting paintballs at each other, we drive a couple of miles to one of the more popular camping spots. Unfortunately, a church group or something had taken up all the spots in the area. This was really the only camping spot we were familiar with, and it was getting pretty late, so we decided to keep on looking. So we drive around for an hour further and further into the woods. By this time, it's getting a bit dark, and we're getting a bit worried about finding a spot. We had a GPS on our smartphones, but none of us had any service. We were off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't very good shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service rangers used a hoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby that said it looked like the 4x4 vehicles had been going around the mound. So it was pretty worn down. Our F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over the mound there, and it was an old gravel road. On the other side of the road was pretty much clear of debris. We drove a few miles down this road and came across an opening next to a small creek. There were some blue tarps hanging over a plywood table nailed to a tree, which seemed kind of odd. That said, it was pretty much dark at this point, and we didn't want to keep driving around all night looking for a camping spot. We left the truck light running and we set up the tent. As we were setting up the tent, I started to notice that there was a lot of trash in the woods surrounding the site. I see a green bottle laying on the ground. I take a look at the label and see that it's a bottle of home and the garden. I was really tired at the time, and I just thought that someone had been dumping their home garbage out here. None of us thought it was weird that someone would be dumping garbage in an area that is more than an hour from the nearest home. We set up camp, had some beers, and made chili from scratch. By this time, it was probably around 11 p.m. as we were eating. We noticed a faint glow from the other side of the nearby hill. At first, we thought it was the moonlight flittering this way through the trees. However, the angles did not make sense. It didn't seem to be bright light, and it wasn't moving. It was kind of like that glow you see over a bright city. We couldn't see the light source itself, though. Since there were no other access roads in the area, we decided it wasn't under campers. The hill was about a quarter mile from our campsite, so we decided to go investigate. Under normal circumstances, I know I wouldn't have done so. However, we all had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and two of us, Jacob and I, decided to take a look. My other friend Isaac decides to stay behind and pop some popcorn over the fire. We start walking towards the light source, and the situation gets even stranger. All the trees in the area have their bark knocked off in a circle around their trunks. We thought it could have been the work of a beaver that lived in the creek, but it seemed strange. that beaver would go around all these trees and just knock the bark off in a circle. Jacob Jacob and I start talking about the ghost beaver. It's pretty loud voices, probably due to the drunkenness, as we're almost to the top of the hill. Jacob tripped and yelled, "Oh crap." A few seconds after he yelled, the light, whatever it was, went out. We look at each other and decide that maybe we don't need to see what the light was after all. We walk back in silence and keep looking back every few seconds. We decide to turn off our flashlight and just use the moonlight to get back to the campsite. When we get a couple of 100 feet from the campsite, I could see my other friend Isaac walking around the campsite. He was wearing a hooded coat that I hadn't seen him wearing before for some reason. He was carrying his paintball gun around in his hand. That seemed a little odd. We said to each other the fire had started to die down, so we couldn't see our campsite very well. At this point, we had probably been gone for almost an hour from the distance. It looked like Isaac was looking for something. He kept walking around the site and was peering in the tent. When we were almost back to the campsite, we saw Isaac walk up to the road we came on. We figured that he was going to use the bathroom and didn't want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, we sat next to the fire and waited for Isaac to come back. All of a sudden, we see him lurch out of the tent. He stumbles a few feet and vomits. After we left, he had a few more rum and cokes. He mumbles out of the tent. He stumbles a few. We ask him why he kept wandering around the campsite with the paintball gun, and he gets a strange look on his face. They're locked up in the cab of the truck. Did you unlock it? We go and check on the truck, enter the door code, and see our paintball equipment just as we left it before. The keys to the truck were still hidden in a magnetic fob underneath. I get a sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach. Isaac, what were you doing after we left? I asked. I was watching a movie on my phone. Then I fell asleep, I guess. But you were walking around with your paintball gun, right? Did you change jackets? Isaac said he had been in the tent since we left and that he had been wearing the same hood fleece all night. Someone had been around our campsite, and it wasn't Isaac. At this point, all of us were way too drunk to drive, but we decided to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We don't bother packing up the tent, we just fold it down with the sleeping bags and everything in it. We jump in the F-150 and start to drive out. When we start to get to the dirt hump, we see something gray blocking our path. The metal barrier that had been lying in the woods earlier. Now it's back on its stand, right on top of the hump earlier. By this point, all of us had been sobered up to the situation. None of us wants to get out of the car to try to move the barrier. I had a metal guard on the front of the F-150, so I drive forward slowly, tapping the metal barrier with the front of my truck. It falls right off, and we drive over it slowly. We were terrified what it would pop one of the truck's tires as we drove over it, but it didn't. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following us with its lights off, probably 1,000 feet behind us, but we kept catching glimpses of it as the moon reflects light off of it. We start to drive as fast as we can on the forest service road, and the other vehicle keeps pace. Doesn't get any closer though. It stays just one or two turns behind us. We can only see it when the road straightens out. After 45 minutes of speeding along gravel roads, we make it back to the main paved road. I start to drive everyone back to my house, but I decide to go a different way just to be safe. I didn't get pulled over for a DUI, luckily. Camping can be fun, but very rural camping can be dangerous. I've driven past that metal barrier since that time, but it's always been in place. I would never go down that road again, though. Camping in the Serial Killer's Forest, read by Psycho. I'm a Union student now, but this incident happened when I was in 8th grade. When I was around 14, I studied a subject fo- focusing on outdoor pursuits. For our final exam, two teachers took my class on a one-night camp where we would do activities like rock climbing, kayaking, trail walking, etc. I live in Australia, around an hour from a state forest, which was nothing new. For, for the backpacker murders, several bodies have been found from us and several more remaining missing. I'm pretty sure all of the murders were linked to the same serial killer. Anyway, in the morning, we leave the school and drive out in a bus. When we reach the road that leads to the entrance of the forest, a police car is parked to the side. He spoke to the teacher for a moment, but I didn't hear anything, and no one else seemed to notice or care. Fast forward a few hours, and uh, we trekked to the camping area, somewhere in the middle of the state forest. Uh, uh, we went kayaking that afternoon. We noticed a helicopter doing flybys, but again, my classmates never suspected anything. A couple of mates and I were in the first to leave the water and helped the teacher with some equipment and started building our own rafts. I was standing off to the side when one of the national park guides walked over to one of the instructors and talked in a hushed, slightly stressed out tone. I remember hearing the instructor say stuff like, "You're kidding," and I don't believe it. He just looked shocked and taken aback. So at this point, I started connecting the dots, but I didn't say anything to my school friends. Around dusk that night, I go to use the toilet block, which is around 100 meters from the main campsite. As I go in, I remember a guy walking around the other side of the block. I didn't see him very clearly in the diminished light, but he kept glancing around with a nervous body language. I couldn't see his face clearly. He wasn't part of our party, and to me, he just didn't fit. I didn't think much of it at the time. Fast forward to the next morning when we get back to the car park. The teacher tells us that a body was found in a dam not far from where we were. They didn't want to tell us so as not to frighten us. We were later found out that it was a young guy who was killed with an axe, and the guy who did it was related to the serial killer who hunted in the woods in the same area. I don't know if that guy I saw had anything at all to do with the murders, but it freaked me out a lot afterwards. I haven't been camping since.